Let's take a look at flowcharts and storyboards for instructional design. I'll talk about why you might want to use them, and we'll go over a few tips on how to do them well. So, instructional design in real life can look very different depending on where and how you work. You might be solo, where you do all the things yourself. You might be part of a team where your role is limited to one piece of what the whole team is putting out. You might be freelance or contract, very common in instructional design. You might only do design. You might only do e-learning development. And you will likely have stakeholders that want to provide input in many of these scenarios. So if you are a solo instructional designer, you have all the hats. You're the designer, you're the developer, you're managing the project, you're doing the graphics potentially. If there is a learning management system involved, an LMS, you might be administrating that. That's a lot of hats to wear, and it's hard to do, but it suits a lot of people. You might also be part of a team where each of these hats is given out to a specific person performing that specific role. And so each part is completely divvied up, where maybe you just do the design, someone else just does development, everyone else has their own role to play in a team, which is great. It's a nice way to work if that suits you. Or you might be part of a team of two, for example, or again, freelance or contract, where you do just the design and then someone else does the e-learning development. Also a possibility. So here's how that looks. If you're the designer, you're going to do all the instructional design, right? The analysis, you're going to think about learning theories, you're going to choose an instructional strategy, you're going to put together a whole learning experience, and your documents you're going to produce are going to be some sort of summary, a flowchart, and a storyboard, right? So theoretically, done well, those get passed on to the e-learning developer who develops all of those things. All they need is the design documents. They're actually building it out in Storyline or Captivate or whatever platform that you all are using. E-learning development is a lower level skill than instructional designer because they're just using the software. They don't need to know anything about instructional design. They are just using the software to build out the object based on the designs provided to them. So theoretically, if the designer does their job well, they pass on the summary, flowchart, and storyboard to the developer, and the developer goes, ta-da! Here's this amazing branching e-learning scenario that you created, for example. So that's one way that flowcharts and storyboards get used in instructional design, is someone creates the design, does all the kind of hard design work, and someone else actually builds it out. So it can be a time saver for an instructional designer. And the designer can focus on higher level work and farm out that lower level work to someone that probably gets paid less as well. Good design can also be a time saver if you're working on your own and you are wearing all the hats. So for example, if you think about design versus development, if you start with a storyboard and flowchart, you can do quick mock-ups or in-depth designs, depending on what you're aiming for. You can use your storyboard as a reference for complex e-learning. For example, if you're building out menus, you can make sure everything goes to the right place. Branching scenarios, those can be really complex to build. If you're using any sort of triggers or advanced actions in your software or variables, your storyboard will make note of where those need to go. So that can be a huge time saver because you're like penciling this all out in advance and you're not just doing it on the fly in the authoring software itself. It's also nice to have a storyboard and flowchart because it's a little bit less work to kind of do a quick mock-up, and that can serve as a review document for stakeholders. So they can give you feedback already on the graphic design, content, structure. You don't need to necessarily build out an entire project, but if you have enough of it built out to give your stakeholders a taste of what it'll look like, or maybe you have some example slides built out in your design, that's a nice way to have someone be able to review your work, and you can still be at the point where you can make drastic changes where it's not a big deal that's going to take you a lot of time. Additionally, they can also serve as a record for you for any media that you use. So if you're using any sort of images or audio, whether it's stock images and audio or stuff you're finding for free on the web that maybe is open media, you can keep track of that in your storyboard as well, so you can make sure you provide attribution to that later on. If you jump right into using your authoring software, depending on, of course, your own personal workflow and your own skill level in the software, it can be really time consuming to start building out in the software because any flaws that you are building out have to be reprogrammed, right? So any flaws or changes, it all has to be reprogrammed. You're more likely to make mistakes without a review document. I mean, if you're building out something very simple, it's not going to be that big of a deal. But if you're building something really complex, you're likely to make mistakes, get lost, forget where you put variables or advanced actions or triggers or whatever. And it's going to be harder to fix those mistakes and get everything sorted out and make a really clean e-learning behind the scenes. It's also easier to get carried away in over-polishing because if you do have stakeholders, you don't want to put so much work into it that's really hard to change. You're going to be resistant to change because, of course, stakeholders are going to have a say in what you're doing. So it's better to have something that's draftier, that's very clear that it's a draft, so that stakeholders are concentrating on what's important and not trying to, get distracted by things that maybe you haven't built out yet in your authoring software. And depending on your software, it does have to be published for review as well, which just can be an extra hurdle rather than passing a document on to somebody. So just something to think about as you're considering your own instructional design practice. And this is also why we are practicing doing storyboards and flowcharts in this particular learning experience ourselves. So let's see a good example of what a flowchart and a storyboard looks like. I've got one here from a past student. This project is called Native American Projectile Points of the Great Basin. So this is one screen that's part of the storyboard, okay? So you'll see here, this is the part that's actually going to be the thing the learner sees. So this is just a design. Obviously, this is created in probably PowerPoint, but you can see around it is all the information you need to be able to build out this project in Storyline or Captivate. For reference, you get the project name. The screen ID is the title of this slide. This is actually also the title slide. The screen number, which corresponds to the flowchart. There's only 10 slides built out here. Functionality includes what's happening on this slide, why this slide exists. Here's the graphics and media. We talked about providing a record for the media that you use. This is also a place where you can say there's a folder. Here's images that are going to go on the slide from that folder. For example, if you provided that to an e-learning developer. Navigation, click start button to advance to the next slide. You say what's going to happen here. Any additional comments go here down below. So this is the graphic design mockup, and this is the information about the project and all the stuff that you need to put this slide together in the software. So you can see this student did a really lovely job with this storyboard. Each slide is very clean. It's a consistent graphic design, of course. They provided a good amount of information that's needed to build out each slide without providing too much information, for example. They also have a style guide they put at the front of the storyboard. So that is right here. So the storyboard, the word storyboard can actually refer to the entire document. Sometimes a storyboard will refer to just one slide in the document as well. So yes, that's a bit confusing, so you know that that is something that can be different depending on who you're talking to. Anyway, so the style guide is basically just one page in the storyboard. It's nice that they're telling you what screen size should be, so that's something a lot of people forget to include because you can change that in the software. What font, here's the color palette. Here's the buttons. This was an old assignment, so that's why it's in black and white, because it required students to be really clear and specific about what colors they actually wanted to use and not just, rely on the visual. And they've mocked up all their buttons in advance as well. So this is a nice way to start getting a consistent look and feel for an entire project by planning this stuff out in advance. And of course, they have another slide here with common elements where they listed how each slide should kind of look in general. So they did a really nice job making sure from the beginning there's going to be kind of a set style that the entire project was going to adhere to. That makes the project look a lot more professional, but has a consistent look and feel. Okay, and then as I mentioned, the screen number at the top here, there's going to be 10 slides all together. There's more in the flowchart, and the number corresponds to the flowchart. So here's a flowchart. Has another, the title reiterated here, so it's really clear these two things belong together. You can see it is a very nice flowchart. There's a specific way to build flowcharts, but as long as you are kind of being clear to yourself or within your own work context, you are doing fine. And they do have a little caption here. This is supposed to be for a prototype they're building out, so this square refers to one slide, one slide output in the e-learning software. So slide number 1 is title slide. Slide number 1 here is title slide. So the title of the slide and the screen number corresponds to the flowchart. Again, number 2 is let's get started. And then number 2 here, let's get started, is number 2. So they did a really nice job making sure these perfectly correspond. So this also gives you a nice way to get an idea of the structure of the e-learning. There's a very specific start, there's some intro slides here, and then there's going to be like a menu slide probably, where it's going to branch out to these other things. Now, again, this is for a specific assignment. This person built this out, so they didn't build out a menu. Oh, actually, the menu's right here, I should say. And you can see where each item on that menu would go. So that's a nice way when you are building out an e-learning. If you have this mocked out, even if you're just a solo person doing this yourself, you can keep yourself on track by making sure you know where everything goes, because if you are just working in the software, you know that the slides are all linear in that left-hand sidebar for you. It's not really giving you an idea of how they are structured. So this is a nice way to mock this all up in advance so you know where everything goes. You can save yourself some time. And again, if you're passing this on to an e-learning developer, it's going to be really clear for them as well. One more thing I want to note is that some of these slides actually take multiple storyboard pages to assemble. So for example, this one is screen number 5, so it's the course menu, and they mocked up each additional way this slide would look depending on what the learner is doing. Oops. Okay, so I guess only one is active here. So they have 5, and then they have 5A here. And 5A is just a change of state on the course menu slide, so they've mocked that up for you, okay? So if you have anything that changes on a slide, you might end up having additional slides in your storyboard, so you can mock up and show what that would look like. I think they have this one here as well, where they have I think 4 different versions of the slide, because you click on or you roll over each silhouette to learn more about each variation. So you have the base slide is number 7, where there's just kind of like a placeholder image, and then as you roll over each item here, the additional image comes up along with the description. So that's why there are 5 slides in the storyboard to actually build out one slide in the final product. So that's most of what I wanted to show you on this, and you can check out this example. It's posted for you to review. This is a really neatly done, very tidy storyboard. Again, very clear. It's clear how these correspond between the flowchart and the storyboard, and what the structure is. So that'd be very handy for building this out. All right, so design tips. Highly recommend including a style guide at the beginning of the storyboard. Choose your colors in advance, probably only like 2 to 3 colors for an entire project, so it's not too busy. You can choose your fonts. You can choose how you want your buttons to look. The more consistent your navigation appears, the better user experience, because every time a user sees something that looks like navigation, they're going to know that it is probably going to be navigation. Label your storyboards to correspond to flowchart. Again, if you're just doing this as a solo person, it makes your life easier. You can save a lot of time if you have a really neatly designed storyboard and flowchart. Because again, in your software itself, it's going to look like everything's all in a line. But if you are using a flowchart, you know how it's actually supposed to be structured and you can build it out accordingly. And your storyboard just needs to be as detailed as you need to get the job done, either for yourself, for the e-learning developer you might pass it off to, or for your stakeholders, for example, that want to be able to review this. All right, quick recap. Why do flowcharts and storyboards? Well, obviously, if you pass it off to someone else, it's going to be essential for them to build it out. But you can also save yourself time, save your e-learning developer time by creating really thorough documents if you're passing them off. Again, they are handy review documents for stakeholders. You don't have to build out an entire project. You build out a few slides, get some comments on the look and feel before you commit to building that out in the software, because it's hard to change things in the software. And again, you can also use these documents as a record to keep track of media used. There's lots more resources online related to flowcharts and storyboards. So get started. Let's get designing.